Okay, imagine waiting over a decade for the biggest game release in human history, Grand Theft Auto 6. You walk into a store, pay your money, grab that plastic case off the shelf, and bring it home. You slice open the shrink wrap, pop open the case, and there is no disc. Just a tiny slip of paper with a printed download code. That isn't a hypothetical horror story. When Rockstar Games opened pre-orders for GTA 6, they confirmed that every physical edition sold across the globe will ship without a disc. For 30 years, buying a boxed game meant something simple. You own a physical piece of software. You could take it off the grid, lend it to a friend, or pull it off your shelf 20 years later, and it would just work. Today, that entire model is being quietly dismantled. Sony has already set a final deadline to stop manufacturing game discs altogether, while major publishers have realized a massive commercial truth. Plastic cases are far cheaper to ship when you don't actually put a game inside of them. Physical games aren't physical anymore. They have quietly turned into souvenir boxes carrying temporary network permission slips. And if you think putting a download code in a box is just an annoying trade-off, wait until you read the fine print on that piece of paper. Because in some countries, an unopened box comes with a ticking clock that makes your purchase completely worthless before you even break the seal. That fine print is worth reading, because in Japan it turns into a countdown. Rockstar's own support page confirms it. Every PS5 download code sealed inside a boxed copy of GTA 6 sold in Japan stops working on May 8, 2027. The game launches November 19, 2026. Do the math, you get 170 days to redeem that code. And on day 171, it doesn't just stop working. Legally, it ceases to exist. Redeem it in time and you're fine, the game lands on your account and stays there. Leave it sealed in the box, and you bought software with a lit fuse inside it. And it's that number that gets me. As a developer, you learn to be suspicious of numbers that specific. Not 6 months, not a year, 170 days. Nobody lands on that by accident. Somebody sat down, ran the math, and wrote it into the box of the most anticipated game of the decade. The reason isn't greed, and there isn't anti-piracy. It's stranger than both, and it has almost nothing to do with video games. So hold on to that number, we are coming back for it. Now, you might hear about expiration dates on paper codes inside a box and think, fine, paper vouchers are just digital tricks. But my real discs? The actual plastic spinning inside my console tray? That is bulletproof offline ownership. Except on July 26, 2026, millions of players found out just how fragile that plastic safety net really is. A massive global Xbox network outage struck, knocking servers offline for nearly 19 hours. Players naturally walk over to the shelves, grab a physical disc, push into the drive, and hit start. They assume offline media meant offline play. But instead of loading the main menu, the screen flashed a blunt error message and blocked the game from booting entirely. The disc was in the drive, the machine was in their living room, and yet the system said no. Why would a physical disc need remote servers just to run? Because of an invisible trade-off console makers made years ago. To a modern console, a game disc is rarely a self-contained world waiting to run locally. It acts like a physical keycard. When you insert that disc, the system initiates a entitlement handshake, a quick security check where your console pings a remote licensing server over the web to ask, does this player have permission to run this game right now? Xbox Chief Technology Officer Scott Van Vliet later confirmed that this entire outage stemmed from a external licensing service failing. Because those remote authentication servers went down, your console couldn't complete the handshake. And if the server doesn't answer, your machine treats that physical disk like a piece of dead plastic, unless you already had set up that specific console as your primary offline system. Think about what that actually means. A plain expiration date on a paper code and an unexpected server failure thousands of miles away produce the exactly same outcome. A locked screen on a game is sitting right in front of you. And this single blackout wasn't just a random bad weekend. It was the spark that ignited an unbelievable chaotic week across the entire industry. That Xbox network crash wasn't just a bad weekend for server admins. It was the boiling point of a chaotic month where the industry's wolf-kept secret finally exploded into the open. If you were following gaming news in July, it felt like physical media was being dismantled right before our eyes, piece by piece. It all kicked off when Sony officially dropped a massive bombshell. Starting in January 28, they plan to completely cease manufacturing physical PlayStation discs. Decades of physical game collection history is scheduled for the chopping block. Behind closed doors, the silence was immediate. Former Santa Monica developer Alana Pierce reported that Sony issued its strictest social media guidelines to date, effectively barring first-party studio employees from saying a word online about the disc phase-out. Predictably, the game community erupted when PlayStation uploaded a trailer for Zack Snyder's live-action Resident Evil film. Thousands of furious players hijacked the video, flooding the comments with passionate protests against those in physical media. And this wasn't just performative nostalgia on social media. The commercial demand was undeniably real. That exact same week, publisher PlayStack put up a physical edition of Mortal Shell 2, and it sold out its initial run in just a few days. Gamers were practically clawing to buy physical media, while the industry tried to pull the carpet out from under them. Up in the corporate boardrooms, the industry's biggest leaders couldn't even agree on what to tell the public. Ubisoft CEO Avis Gilmore defended their digital push during a earnings call, arguing that dropping discs would not disturb the industry too much, drawing comparisons to how PC games successfully shifted to digital platforms years ago. But Sega president Shoji Utsumi openly disagreed, publicly affirming that Sega still values the culture of physical media. Even Rockstar Games co-founder Dan Husser stepped up at San Diego Comic-Con to defend player choice, pointing out that if people want physical games, companies should provide them. Yet, while executives traded PR quotes and fans rioted in YouTube comment sections, almost everyone missed the real punchline. This frantic battle over whether physical discs should survive was hiding a much stranger reality. The industry wasn't just preparing to kill physical media in 2028. If you look at how modern console hardware actually functions, your game discs had already been killed years ago. We just hadn't noticed. All this corporate drama and internet outrage brings us to a surprisingly simple question. Why does a plastic disc sitting inside your console needs an internet connection to work in the first place? If you play on a PlayStation 2, you remember the honest version of this. Disc goes in, laser spins up, the console reads the game of the plastic in real time. The disc was the game. Unplug everything and it still worked, because there was nothing else to ask. That stopped being true for a genuinely boring reason. Modern games are enormous, and optical drives are slow, painfully slow next to a console SSD. So the disc got demoted. Now it dumps encrypted data onto your internal storage, and from then on the plastic has exactly one job: sit in the tray and prove you are allowed to run what's already installed. Which sounds fine, that's a key, except the disk doesn't verify anything by itself. It can't. All that disk does is trigger a question your console asks somebody else. Here's the actual sequence when you press play. Your console looks for a valid license token on its own drive. If this machine is registered as your account's primary console, that token lives locally and offline play works. That's the setting that saved the handful of people who could still boot games during the outage. But tokens have expiry dates. They go stale, and a stale token has to be refreshed over the network. And if this isn't your primary console, a second console upstairs, a friend's machine, the one your kid plays on, there is no local token to trust at all. Every single launch goes out to the internet and asks permission first. So here's the honest description of a modern game disk. It isn't the game, it isn't even the key. It's a request form. The key lives on a server you have never seen, owned by a company that can stop answering, on purpose, by accident, or eventually. And none of that is a bug. Every piece of it was designed, reviewed, and shipped on purpose. Which means the interesting question isn't how the handshake works anymore. It's who it was built for. Because it wasn't built for you. Once you understand that a modern disk is essentially just an offline license key waiting for a remote server's permission, you have to ask the obvious question: why go through all this trouble? Why spend millions re-engineering how consoles launch games just to keep a digital leash on a piece of plastic sitting right inside your drive? The answer isn't technical, it's pure cold arithmetic. When a studio sells a traditional boxed game at a physical store, a massive slice of your $70 never reaches the developer. Retail partners routinely take around a 30% cut just for putting the box on a shelf. And on top of that, you have the cost of pressing Blu-ray discs, printing cover art, shipping heavy crates across oceans, and managing unsold stocks sitting in warehouses. For a publisher, physical distribution is a logical nightmare that eats away at profits. By forcing ownership through remote server handshakes, publishers quietly solve several of their biggest financial headaches at once. Take the used game market. For decades, game companies despised the fact that you could finish a game, sell the disc to a friend, or buy a used copy at the store without a single dollar going back to the team that made it. With remote licensing and account validation, that secondary market vanishes completely. It also enforces strict regional pricing locks, making sure players in one country can't simply import cheaper physical copies from another. Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot even pointed to PC gaming to defend this shift, arguing that the industry successfully moved to digital platforms like Steam years ago without breaking down. And if from a financial standpoint, you can see why publishers are so eager to follow that roadmap. Remote handshakes give them total control over software access, protection against piracy, and a direct path to reclaiming billions in lost margins. When you add it all up, the push toward digital handshakes looks like a publisher's ultimate dream. Every commercial incentive points toward replacing physical disks with account permissions. But when corporate strategy completely replaces physical objects with digital codes, it runs straight into bizarre legal hurdles that nobody expected. Which brings us to one of the strange consequences of this whole shift. Why a quiet banking law in Tokyo forced Rockstar to put a strict 170-day expiration date inside the box of GTA 6. 170 days, not 6 months, not a year, and the reason is that 6 months is precisely where Japanese financial law changes its mind about what you are holding. Under Japan's Payment Services Act, a voucher valid for 6 months or longer stops being a product and becomes a prepaid payment instrument, the same legal category as stored credit or a gift card balance. And once something is a prepaid instrument, the company that issued it has to deposit half of all unredeemed value with the government, 50% sitting in escrow, frozen until somebody redeems that code. For a publisher selling millions of copies, tying up tens of millions of dollars in a government vault, just waiting for players to redeem their codes is financial poison. So how do the corporate accounts dodge that law? Simple, they cap the validity at 170 days. That places just 10 days under the 6-month threshold, completely exempting the publisher from holding cash reserves. It is a masterclass in financial engineering, but it highlights a deeper reality. Physical releases are no longer built for software preservation. They are built around tax codes, server overhead, and legal loopholes. And if you think you can escape this trend by sticking to handheld consoles, Nintendo has a quiet surprise waiting for you. Which leaves us one company still holding out. Sort of. Nintendo does still ship cartridges, real game data, on real plastic, playable on plane with the Wi-Fi off. But on Switch 2, a lot of third-party releases now arrive as something called a game keycard. And a game keycard does not hold the game, it's an activation key. Plug it in and the console turns to the internet for tens of gigabytes before you ever reach a title screen. Same reason as everything else in this video, a chip big enough to hold a modern game costs real money, and a chip with nothing on it costs pennies. They get a physical box on a retail shelf to catch your eye, but the low manufacturing cost of a digital release. The catch? The storage burden is pushed entirely onto your console's memory, and the game is now tethered to external servers. So whether it's an Xbox disc failing a remote network handshake, a PlayStation box holding a download code with a legal ticking clock, or a Switch card that forces a massive download, the outcome is identical. The self-contained physical game is gone. Which brings us to the ultimate question. When you buy a physical game today, what are you actually paying for? So, what are you actually paying for? Here's the honest answer, and it takes about 4 seconds to check for yourself. Pick up any game you own, disc, cartridge, box set code, whatever is sitting on your shelf right now, and ask it one question. If every server this thing talks to went dark tomorrow, would it still boot? For a game from 20 years ago, the answer is yes. That disk was the whole thing. For most of what shipped this year, the answer is no. And nobody prints that on the backing. That's the shift. And notice that nobody stole anything from you here. Every decision with cover was rational on its own terms. High capacity flash memory really is expensive. Retail really does take its 30%. The Japanese extra rule really would freeze tens of millions of dollars in a government vault. Nobody sat in a boardroom deciding to take your games away. They each solved one small problem, and the accumulated answer is that the object stopped being the game and became permission to play it. And here's the part that gets to me. As someone who actually built this stuff, none of this was technically necessary. You can ship a finished self-contained game on a disk and still patch it, still add it to it for a decade, still let it grow. Those two things were never in conflict. We did exactly that for years. The complete version in the box and the updates waiting for anyone who wanted them. We stopped because the empty box is cheaper. That is the whole reason. Not because live games demand it, not because the technology forces anyone's hand. A card with no chip in it costs pennies, and a shelf nobody can resell from is worth more. So if you are annoyed that the case in your hand has nothing in it, that is not nostalgia, you are noticing something real. The box still looks exactly like it did back then. Same size, same weight, same shrink wrap, same promise printing on the front. It is just empty now.